Hi lads, my name is the Metagoblin and welcome to my Frost Death Knight dual wield and two-handed PvE raiding DPS guide updated for 6.2. There will be a number of sections to this guide which can be accessed using the navigation bar above. We will be covering gearing, talents, glyphs, damage and utility, though if you subscribe to my channel you'll see many more videos covering more precise topics. Let's jump into the guide. First of all, we'll begin with the essentials in order to ensure your Death Knight is tuned up properly to maximise his pressure in the PvE environment. The main stats a Frost Death Knight wants to prioritise when choosing gear is firstly for dual wielding, mastery and then multi-strike, and for two-handed it is haste and then multi-strike. For dual wield you should be enchanting full mastery and gemming full mastery. Use a rune of Fallen Crusader on your main hand and use a rune of Razor Eyes on your off hand. For two-handed you should be enchanting full haste and gemming full haste and using the rune of a Fallen Crusader on your two-handed weapon. Now let's jump through talents. Now let's run through the talents. The first thing you need to understand about talents is that some are chosen due to the player's preference, some are better than others in different situations, and some are mandatory and some are completely useless. In the first tier, Plague Leech is the most significant DPS increase and it's as simple as that. The second tier is between Purgatory or Anti-Magic Zone, though Lich Ball may come in useful in soloing situations. Use Anti-Magic Zone when you can protect your raid team from massive AoE magical damage. If there isn't a situation like that, then just go for Purgatory, since this is essentially a self-resurrection when combined with Death Pact. Most of the time, Death's Advance will be the most useful. Go for Asphyxiate if the stun is useful in a fight, like for instance locking down a boss ad, and the same goes for Chillblains, which is useful for locking down big groups of ads. Now, people have been discussing which is the best talent in the 4th tier since the dawn of time, so I'm not going to go over it too much. Blood Tap is the most viable option since you can choose when to regenerate your runes, and this means you can regenerate your runes when you get a Killing Frenzy proc, but more on this later in the damage section. Tier 5 is fairly simple. Go for Death Pact with Purgatory in most fights for minimum DPS loss, but if you are in some kind of situation where you must solo something without a healer, then go for Death Siphon and Lichborn and Blood Tap for maximum persistent survivability. The 6th tier is purely situational. Go for Gorfiend's Grasp when grouping up ads or trash is useful to increase in raids DPS, or it's just helpful in general. And then go for Remorseless Winter when AoE stunning a group of ads or trash is useful for locking them down for whatever reason. And go for Desecrated Ground when you know escaping CC will be beneficial, especially if that CC is potentially life-threatening. The last tier depends on your fight. Very simply, if your target doesn't move a lot, then go for Defile. But if it does move, then go for Necrotic Plague. Necrotic Plague is nice because you won't have to waste a rune to use Plague Strike to get your both your diseases back on so that you can use Plague Leech. And BOS, the damage is actually less for dual wielding than actually for striking, but I think it's still relatively strong for two-handed. Now let's quickly run through the glyphs. I'd recommend both the Regenerative Magic and Glyph of Anti-Magic Shell, but you can't use both at the same time, so your choice really depends on the fight. Secondly, Glyph of Raised Ally will make combat resing much simpler without nerfing your DPS. Glyph of Shifting Presences can be useful when you need to move faster in situations and survive high damage phases and without actually losing any of your DPS. Glyph of Dark Simulacrum can be used extremely effectively when you know you can steal a form of DPS spell and turn it around for a high DPS increase. But you can still like loads of crazy stuff like like buffs or healing. So it's always going to be quite useful. In Blackrock Upper Blackrock Spire you can steal a mob cast. So basically you can start summoning a mob. It doesn't actually help you because you have to kill it, but there's some crazy stuff you could do with Dark Simulacrum. Icebound Fortitude can also be useful for encounters when high damage occurs quite frequently and you need a shorter cooldown. You could probably find use in the others in certain unique situations, but it will take me ages to go through it all. For minor glyphs, firstly go for the Glyph of Path of Frost, since this will reduce your falling damage, which will inevitably happen at some point in a raid. And also go for Glyph of Tranquil Grip, and Army of the Dead so that you don't irritate the tank, and also because Death Grip is actually a very useful piece of utility, and you want to be taking advantage of its usefulness without actually killing yourself. Now let's jump into damage. Frost relies on the mechanics of Killing Machine, which is a proc that gives Frostspec the majority of its DPS, so it's very important to learn how it works. The proc has a chance to occur on every melee swing, but that chance occurs again when you use a melee special ability like Obliterate or Frost Strike or anything like Plague Strike, anything. So Killing Machine can be consumed by either Obliterate or Frost Strike, and it's important to understand which ability to consume it with at certain times, and depending on whether you're dual wielding or using a two-handed weapon. For dual wielding, you want to prioritise consuming the proc with Frost Strike. But if the proc occurs when you have absolutely no runic power, then you use it with Obliterate. The opposite goes for two-handed. You want to consume the proc with Obliterate and avoid using it with Frost Strike. Another proc to learn is Rhyme, which has a chance to occur on every Obliterate hit and causes your Howling Blast to consume no runes. This obviously comes after consuming a Killing Machine proc, but it's a good time filler to wait for your actual proc to occur. For dual wielding, the idea of your rotation is to ensure that you only consume your Killing Frenzy procs with Frost Strike if you have runic power, which means you should have runic power. When you have runic power, instead of using Obliterates, you want to begin using your Howling Blasts instead, since this won't lose DPS by wasting a proc on Obliterate. So if you're just before building enough runic power to use a Frost Strike, then you start using your Howling Blasts instead of using an Obliterate, because you don't want a proc to occur and it go and Obliterate and you just got enough runic power for Frost Strike, and it's just like Frost Strike, so it's chilling there for too long, not getting a proc and not turning around to regenerate your runes. So yeah, that's how it works basically. I mean, this is primarily why Blood Tap is so useful, since you can build up runic power on demand to consume the Killing Frenzy proc with Frost Strike. So you get a proc, you don't have any runic power, but you have like 12 charges of Blood Tap. You can just start using the charges, spamming out the Howling Blast to build up the runic power, and then consume the Killing Machine proc with Frost Strike. You may think, Howling Blast is like complete DPS loss compared to Obliterate, but it's not really. Because Howling Blast does about half the damage of Obliterate, but it only consumes one rune, so it's a very close. When you consume 2 Howling Blasts, the damage is very close to 1 Obliterate. So let's talk through the rest. Remember to use Plague Leech whenever it's off the cooldown. Remember to fresh your diseases with either Outbreak, Howling Blast, or Plague Strike, so that you can use Plague Leech again, but also benefit from the dot damage. This is obviously only relevant if you're using the Defiled talent. So remember to keep Defile on the ground whenever the spell is available, and especially during phases where a boss keeps very still for a long time. It's best to store up Blood Taps to consume Defile so it doesn't mess up with your rune cycles, and the same goes for Soul Reaper, which you should be using every 6 seconds when the boss goes below 35% health. For two-handed, it's all the same, except for the fact that you don't consume your Killing Machine procs with Frost Strike, but you may have to if you have to wait too long to regenerate your runes. In two-hand, I like to store up my Blood Taps and wait until a Killing Machine proc occurs while I have absolutely no runes, and I just use the Blood Taps or a Plague Leech so I can consume the proc when it occurs. With Obliterate, so I'm only using Obliterate with Killing Machine most of the time rather than wasting it on a Frost Strike. Let's jump through all the cooldowns. So Pillar of Frost is best used when another proc occurs, like from your weapon or trinket, which is extremely likely to occur in the opener. Also, if your trinket is a non-use trinket, then you try to use it. Try to use them together, like with Pillar of Frost, but don't wait. Like 1 minute or 2 minutes for Pillar of Frost to come back or for the trinket to come back. Ideally, though, you should be using it once every minute. In Power Rune Weapon, you should only be using this in very desperate situations, like for instance when you have a Killing Machine proc but no runes or runic power. So basically, when you're in a situation where that Killing Machine proc is waiting long enough for another one to occur, therefore the first one is wasted, or long enough to literally just fall off. Remember to use Army of the Dead 7 seconds before a boss is pulled, and also use your potion just before the boss is pulled and later in the fight. You may not like Blood Tap, and I completely understand you. It's a bit of a ball ache, so you may want to go for Runic Corruption. I can only see it becoming viable for two-handed, since you really need your runic power for damage in dual wield rather than just being a dump to get your runes back. but the idea is to only consume your runic power the precise moment 3 runes begin recharging while using runic corruption. Now let's run through the utility at a Death Knight's disposal. Firstly, let's go through the defensive cooldowns. Anti-magic shell. This should be used when you can anticipate big magical damage, to prevent damage obviously, but to also generate runic power from the damage you absorb. Use Icebound Fortitude in the same way, but perhaps during a longer period of big damage intake, since the duration is actually pretty long, and it can also pop you out of stuns. Remember, don't neglect a Death Strike just because it's a DPS loss. If you need it to survive, then you use it, since you're no use to anyone dead. Use Mind Freeze to interrupt boss and trash spellcasts. Use Chains of Ice to pin down ants or trash. The duration can also be extended with Festering Strike. Switch into Blood Presence the same way you use Anti-Magic Shell. It can also be helpful during solo situations, but be careful not to rub aggro from the tank. Anyway lads, that is the end of the guide. If you're like about to write a nasty comment about, where the hell is the game footage, I want to see some game footage, it's all fine and dandy talking about that, but give us some proof, then I will probably be I'm gonna release a gameplay talk through guide soon. I'm basically just gonna jump myself into a raid and talk through shit, probably do shit DPS because I'm like talking through it, but at the end of the day I'll probably be helpful to you guys. Anyway, my name is the Meta Goblin, and until my next video, ciao!